Thank you for tuning in to the World Builders Anvil, episode 266, video games and the expertly displayed art of vamping.
Don't know where to start building your fantasy world?
Do you need more? Does it make sense?
Forget any worries and become a crafter of imagination.
This is the place where we will prime your mind.
Now, it's time to heat up the forge,
break out the mithril ingots and hammer.
Welcome to the World Builders Anvil. I'm Jeffrey W. Ingram.
And I'm Michael Miller.
Let's sup from the mug of Java and build. Welcome back. Half dazed, but not baked. I'm Jeffrey W. Ingram.
Glad to be far from the plague ship Ingram. I am Michael Miller.
Yes, for those of you who are in the Undercroft, which is our Facebook group at facebook.com/Undercroft, you'll know that I've been kind of silent for like 2 weeks, which is that time I actually wanted to be very vocal, unfortunately. But I've been silent largely because plague has hit my house. It's been going on for about 3 weeks now. I'm through, I think, the worst of it, unless there's something else going on that I don't know about. So, So my voice should actually finally be good, and Michael's glad because we usually like to have a backlog of episodes which I've burned through in my last illness. So here we are.
We were starting to get ourselves with a nice pillow, because when one of us has to take some time off or do a little something, we like to have a couple episodes banked, and then for exactly this sort of thing.
Yep.
And then you got sick, and we haven't been able to record anything in 2 weeks, it's been a long time since we've skipped a full 2 weeks. So
yeah,
good to talk to you, Jeff.
It's good to talk to you as well, Fred. I'm sorry.
I prefer Frederick.
Frederick.
So my full name would be.
And I have to say, it's actually kind of because of me being sick for two levels inspired this episode. One, I really just haven't had the ability to sit down and stay awake long enough to write out show notes or anything intellectual. Two, I'm not intellectual enough to bullshit my way through it. Warning, this episode might be explicit. And three, because I said two things.
You should have said that off the bat.
and three, I was struck by nostalgia this week. And it was kind of nostalgia that got going. So I'll give you kind of the backstory. Michael's not heard the backstory yet.
I have not.
I just want to get through it. But essentially, I was sitting down and I was feeling like crap, and I couldn't sleep either because when I was sleeping, it was a virus. So like cold stuff was going on. So I'm being flooded with stuff, which is then waking me up. So I couldn't get like a solid 8 hours of sleep for a little while.
That always makes it hard to recover when you can't get the proper rest.
And then of course the baby was sick as well too. So there's certain things you have to be awake for when you have a sick baby too. So my wife was also sick, so all of us were sick. And so one night I'm kind of up late at night, and I'm sitting there, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to download LOTR. And for those of you that don't know what LOTR is, it is a
LOTR.
LOTR.
Never heard of it.
Yes, you have. It is Lord of the Rings Online.
Oh, you're abbreviating. Got you.
Yes. And
yes, I have heard of Lord of the Rings Online.
Yeah. And so essentially it was originally made by Turbine, the guys who made Dungeons and Dragons Online. And it was what attracted me to it, obviously, wanting to sort of experience more of the world of Tolkien, which is...
Wait, I'm sorry, Tolkien or Tolkien?
Yes. And so my wife and I played it for years, probably from the first beta through probably 2012, which was several years. I don't know how long. And then we finally just kind of, kind of always my problem with MMOs is I like the people. The setting was awesome and probably kept me there longer than it would have otherwise. Longer than, like, say, WoW did. Longer than... probably about the same length of time I played EQ, but that was more of a novelty at that point. And Because those kind of games end up feeling like jobs, especially when you get into in-game content.
Yeah.
You know, and you don't play the MMOs, but you play. I mean, in a way, Destiny's the same kind of idea, though, where when you get to end game, you're sort of grinding through dailies and raids and stuff.
I am grinding. Like, I'm currently grinding for a weapon, and the way this one thing works is it's based on the season. So when the season changes, you'll lose the ability to acquire certain things.
So they force you to wait a whole year, essentially.
No, some of these weapons never show up again. Like, if you don't get them in that time period, you never see them again. I don't know if that's what's going to happen, but I'm coming to the close of the season, and I'm working towards something right now that I have a quest for. I think because I already have the quest, I'll still be able to get it. I don't know if I have to have it complete by the time this season. I don't know if this quest falls into one of those, but it's like a 10-stage quest, and I just hit like a stage. I'm like, I'm on the final stretch. I've got like four left, and 2 of them are literally, you gotta like go talk to this person. So it's really only 2 more really working for it, grinding steps. The step I'm on now, I have to do 75 Crucible matches. Every one of those matches takes 5 to 8 minutes. I need to do 75 of them. I don't have a lot of time to be sitting and playing that much, so it's been taking forever for me to do it.
Yeah, no, I can buy that. I remember like some games are worse than other ones when it comes to that. But I mean, the thing is, LOTR was always one that interested me because there's a couple things LOTR did well. One, the world was amazing, but they had so much source material to work off of. That's the benefit of good world building, right? So Tolkien spent decades of his life making all this stuff up, and hundreds, if not thousands, of people have visualized it, created art off of it. I mean, there's so much inspiration and stuff out there about it that it's so well developed that in a way it's great because you have a lot of source material, but in another way it's more difficult because some people who have their knowledge of Lord of the Rings from the movies. You have other people who have it from the books. You have other people who have it from the cartoons.
And other video games.
All of which, lore-wise, aren't nearly as good. Which is something, their lore was always very good in Lord of the Rings, and which I think it had to be. But the thing was, there's something special about going in and playing a Hobbit, But the neat thing is like, their different classes felt different, which in some of the MMOs I played, because my wife and I played MMOs for years, that's not always true. It's kind of like, well, these 2 classes are basically the same.
This guy's better with bows. This guy's better with knives. But otherwise, they're pretty much the same.
But they're pretty much the same thing. And it's probably more of a, at this point, I would assume, that style of combat, sort of the button mashing for skills, is probably more outdated at this point. But when we were playing MMOs, WoW was that way. EQ kind of started that path, as far as I know. It was just a nostalgic moment. But I was kind of thinking about they really, the way they took the jobs of the heroes. It's like a lore master in the game was kind of their version of, they couldn't do straight wizards to have it fit in with lore, so they came up with something called lore masters, which is not really a wizard, but is kind of, and it felt different than other things that used magic-like ideas. Their different DPS classes had different ways they operated, so they felt different. They had a little bit different mechanics. So, and then they had some classes like the Warden class, which was it was a proactive. The first one I ever did was proactive, where you're trying to get things to go off before you need them, but you have a limited time window to use them. This idea of gambits, which was pretty cool. So all of the classes kind of felt like actual different things, which is very unusual for most games with classes. But really, there's just something special about going around Rivendell and seeing it, and that's really probably the biggest attraction. And my wife and I can play together, and she ended up downloading it too, and we only played for like an hour or so. because we're both sick. But
did you
it brought a bunch of nostalgia.
Did you have saved files so that you could play your old characters?
Well, we actually had bought lifetime accounts when the game first came out.
Mm-hmm.
So they were looking to essentially get capital. So one way you can do it instead of going to investors is to do stuff like lifetime accounts. So, and essentially when they went free to play, what happened was since no one's forced to pay for a subscription, they could, and you got certain benefits for being a subscription, were counted as a subscriber forever. Mm-hmm. And we got points for their store, which is where most of the MMOs outside of WoW make money. Because you don't have the subscriber base that like WoW has.
So like consumables or cosmetics?
Consumables, cosmetics. They have a few new races that were in there. Actually, they came out with 2 expansions after we stopped playing. We bought both of those with the points that had been piling up.
Nice.
So essentially, but we kind of started over. We had all of our own old characters. The server we were on closed down. But our characters were actually still there. We just transferred them to a new server, but neither one of us had the courage to play them because it's like, some of the stuff is like you learn the skills over time, and it's like it'd be ugly, and we could join up and probably play it through with no issue, but because we're no longer close to the level cap that we were at when we quit,
right?
It's also you have all these skills, you don't really remember what any of them do. So we both kind of took our favorite class and we started over, and we played for a little while, had some fun, saw some areas that we had been in before, doing some of those horrible procedural quests, which all MMOs are shoved full of. At least all the ones I've ever played do. But it got me thinking, what are some other interesting games? Because I know we have a lot of creatives out there, and a lot of times I always talk to authors directly or sometimes to game masters directly. And occasionally we talk about video game people. I know we have some out there. We have some creating MMO in our Undercroft group. If you're interested in an indie version, go to the Undercroft, and possibly you can get connected there because indie people, you work for nothing and you might not ever get anything from it but experience and the joy of doing it.
Is valuable, yeah.
And actually I was very close to getting involved myself with that project. It's just one of those things where it's like, if it had been a single player, I probably would have gone for it, but I really didn't have the time. So
I hear you.
Which is disappointing because I kind of wanted to, because I always loved the community. And in a way, I have a personality where I like serving people. So those procedural, like fetch and deliver quests, I always felt obliged to do those. Even if I was done in the area, I would try and clean up my quest because I would feel guilty for not helping the people out. Kill those monsters or deliver their flowers to someone across town. So, but that's probably more of a personal problem of mine. But I was kind of thinking, what are some other games that I really loved? And we talk about some all the time, Fallout or Elder Scrolls line of games from Bethesda. I know we've talked about Suikoden several times, but really, and I know Michael has some games too, and mine will probably be closer to role playing, if not, they're not all role playing. I've written a couple down, but there's like different reasons why nostalgically they stick in my brain where, as a young kid, I've been playing video games for a long time, and other ones have just, I don't even remember them anymore. And so, especially for world building creatives, which ones do I think are the most interesting? You probably can't even get half these games I've written down or play them anymore. But with Steam, sometimes you can get older games again. So who knows? Sometimes they're on mobile now, so who knows?
If you feel like hunting, I have found that
there are emulators and stuff like that.
There's emulators. You can get a lot of ROMs. There's there's a lot of people out there who are way into the retro gaming scene. So trying to find older titles is usually very possible. Even what's ironic is sometimes certain games that were like cherished titles, they're like free or nearly free now, and there's other times where there's like these old cherished titles that the companies have more than made their money on the title, but you still have to pay $20-$25 to get your hands on it.
Yeah.
Which I don't necessarily agree with that for all titles, but there are some titles that I'm like, okay, yeah, it's still worth it. I'm playing Destiny as we speak. Actually, I have been playing Destiny now since its pre-release. I was on it in the beta. I bought an Xbox One solely, not solely for it because I play on Xbox, but I bought an Xbox One mostly because the Division looked amazing. The Division is what sold me on getting, on going to the next gen.
That was an Xbox exclusive.
I don't think so. I think
that just gives you to check out the $200 to up the gen on your system.
Right. It was the game that I was the most excited about for the next gen was the Division. The Division takes place in New York City. I used to live in New York City. It was supposed to be a very realistic model of the city, which it is to a degree. Obviously, it's to scale, but it really looks and feels like you're running around the city. It's a really, really good model of New York.
And Michael did live there for years. I just want to point out. So he's actually someone I would trust their word is what I'm about to say there.
Oh, gotcha. Please continue. But here's the thing. I had not heard of Destiny, didn't know anything about it. And like a friend of mine was like, oh yeah, if you pre-order, I think it was for pre-ordering the Division or it might've been for pre-ordering Destiny. There was something where it's like, okay, you can get the beta for Destiny. And I was like, yeah, okay, I'll check it out. Why not? Because at this point I had the Xbox. So I'm just like, checking out new games. And I started playing Destiny. I was like, wow. I was like, this game. Oh, the other thing that sold me on Destiny on trying it, because, I don't have as much time to play video games. So I knew when I was going to get the Division that's all I'd be playing for a while. So I didn't want to go out and buy a bunch of games. I just wanted to have like one, maybe two games because I knew not much else was going to have time to play. So I wasn't interested in Destiny. I was
Except for the obligatory Skyrim for every game system, but continue.
So I said, okay, well, I'll check it out because it's made by Bungie. It's made by the guys that did Halo.
Yeah, it was the Halo guys. Yep.
Right. And I loved Halo. So I was like, okay, is this going to be like, their next Halo? They were touting it as, this is going to be this open world sort of shooter. And it's not really an open world shooter. It's a shared world shooter. It's open-ish.
It's like it has a bunch of big areas essentially.
Exactly. But there's plenty of levels, and But I played the demo, and I was so wowed by the demo. And you could only play in like one area. You could only play like through a couple of missions, maybe, and you could only level your character up to like, I don't know, maybe level 8. And at the time, I think you could go to level 25 before this was like in the very beginning of the game. And I was like, wow, there is a lot to this game. Like this game has some serious playability. Like it's just so playable. So I was like, oh, forget it. I'm going to get this game. And I got it. And I have been playing it ever since. I have put so many hours into this game. It is insane. Yeah. Like I have other games that I played for years and years and years, like Gears of War and Rainbow Six, pretty much most of the Call of Duties, and I'm trying to think of what else. Like I was playing for a long time there. But anyway, and Destiny, like I remember talking to people about it one time, and they were like, oh, they were looking at, because you can look at a player's hours, how many hours they've spent playing a given game. I honestly don't remember how to do it. It's somewhere in the menuing system. I would check right now on this one, but I honestly don't remember how to do it. And at the time, somebody was like looking at everybody. We were playing together, it's like 6 people playing. They were looking at the thing, and they're like, oh my God, you have 2,500 hours on this game. And I'm like, is that a lot? And they're like, yeah, that is an insane amount. I was like, is it really? And they're like, yes. And I was like, oh, okay. I mean, I played a lot at the time. I was probably.
But you're more like me, where you play a game or two and not.
Well, but back then I did have more time. Back then I would go to work, I'd come home, I would literally play Destiny for like 6 to 8 hours every single day.
Okay.
So it was nuts. Absolutely nuts. I don't have that kind of time to play these days. I kind of wish I still did. But the world, what's kind of amazing about Destiny is a lot of people will take Destiny at face value and just be like, okay, It's a fantastic, super playable shooter, and you could just stop there. And to be honest, most of the time I do stop there. But there is so much rich lore and story to the game that it's there for the taking.
Yeah.
You do have to do a little work. There's a lot of reading. There's a lot of stories. There are content creators that all they do is log the lore of Destiny. They create timelines. They tell stories. They share it. In the first game, there was so much lore to the game that it wasn't in the game. Like, to get all the lore, you had to go to the website. So you would unlock things in the game. It would then allow you to look at lore on the website.
One of the games I won't be talking about today, Crusader Kings 2, which is a game I do play occasionally.
One of the games I won't be talking about.
Yeah, I'm just going to mention it really quickly. But it's based it's Earth, where you start at a certain time and then you deviate from the actual timeline. And
kind of like a Civ.
Kind of like a Civ, but it's a grand strategy game. So very in depth, kind of mechanics, and the kind of game that most people probably, I don't know if a lot of people play. Enough most play because they keep making games like this. So
if it's still profitable, they'll still make it. Yeah,
and so the cool thing is, though, it's like where you have the real characters, you actually click through the links to get out, to learn about the actual person, from inside of the game, which I thought was a neat touch, especially since you're taking from real history as a starting point. And you can start anywhere from like the 1740s, I think, to like 1200 AD. So there's a large, where if you start at different time periods, it's kind of the people who were around ruling at that time are the actual people there. And I'm sure in the areas where they didn't really know, they just kind of had to fill in and guess. But a lot of the areas they did have an idea of who was there. So I think it's just kind of a neat touch where you can get to the reality when a game borrows from it. Or it's like I like like Lord of the Rings Online. It's great lore about Lord of the Rings because it's based on it. So I think you have to give the love to the world. And I like games like groups like Bungie who have lore people on their team. And you could tell the difference when someone builds a game and they just throw together a world for the purpose of a game, and they don't, for whatever reason, they choose not to go that route. You can tell in the quality of the lore. It's like, I think one of the reasons why WoW worked as well as it did was it hit at the right time. It was a smooth game, but they put a lot of love into the lore of their world.
Well, the thing is, though, WoW also had a very established foundation before the World of Warcraft came out. They already had like 3 other Warcraft games, and they've been working with that world for a long time.
But it's like they had the people who were dedicated to the lore, which is what made the world so rich. And I have heard recently, Activision has maybe gotten rid of all the non-developer people working at Activision. So I don't know if that's still going to be true or not going forward. Hopefully it is, because I'm not necessarily a huge fan of all Blizzard games, but
I used to
be. They do put a lot of love into their games, at least the ones I played, which hasn't been anything in a long time. But hey, that's just me.
Back in my old PC days.
The last first-person shooter game I played that I bought, Rainbow Six.
Which one?
The one called Rainbow Six, the first one.
The original Rainbow Six?
Yeah, that was the last first-person shooter I bought, yeah.
God, what year did that come out in?
I have no idea. That was way pre-multiplayer, though, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I believe that's true.
But yeah, I think, that's one thing I give Bungie credit for. I mean, even like Halo, I never played Halo, but they obviously put a lot of thought into the way the world works and interacts with each other. And so for me, taking a step a little bit further back, and I mentioned the game a little bit already, EQ. This will be the last multiplayer game I'm going to.
And that's EverQuest for those of you that don't know.
Yeah, I should be clear because you have to be pretty old to know.
Yeah, there's some people that wouldn't know it yet.
Yeah, especially like newer people probably never even heard of it because that's pre-WoW. So most people don't know. Everyone calls most of the fantasy games, WoW clones, WoW was actually a EQ clone.
Yeah, it's true.
And the thing was that made it better was it. They worked out a lot of the bugs. It was a very smooth game when WoW came out. But a lot of the elements, but once again, it was the lore of the world. And the thing I liked was there were sort of two levels of factions you had to worry about. So the game was PvP and PvE at the same time, if I remember correctly. And I don't remember exactly how the PvP worked, and I could be wrong. Maybe there wasn't PvP, but there were kind of like, WoW, there were good and evil races. But as you went around the world, your faction could change. And so you could actually, you could walk up and certain towns, the guards would kill you on sight. And I found that interesting. It was a very unforgiving game too. And most older games are a bit more unforgiving, I found. But like literally you walked in, this is the first 3D multiplayer game I played. And you would I logged in as a dark elf in the world, which is an underground city, of course, not at all derivative of Dungeons and Dragons. But you have these dark elves who live underground, and then my wife and I both were playing the game. Actually, I started before I met my wife, so it was a really long time ago. But I like logged in and I'm like sitting in the city, and it took me probably an hour and asking questions of other people. I had to ask people questions on like, how do you, what do you, I don't know how to get out of this zone. And there's, nothing guiding you to the way. So, but in a way, I think it was good for a multiplayer game. It forced me to interact with the community. Now, everyone instantly knew I was a noob.
Mm-hmm.
And like most noobs, as soon as I could get out of the city on my own, I would laugh at anyone who would ask the question and call them noobs, just because I was younger at the time as well too. But it was a very immersive. It was the first time where I was really immersed, where you felt like when you stepped into the avatar that you picked, that you were part of this thing. Now there were things I really didn't like about the game. It was, like most multiplayer games, really grindy. Like I remember like quest items would drop off of a monster, but there were no instances back then. So you would have people who would camp the area where the mob would drop to give you the loot that you wanted. The ones that come to mind are the J boots, the journeyman boots, which would increase your run speed. And if I remember correctly, but everyone wanted these things when EQ first came out. And so there would always be a group of people sitting there because there was one monster in the game that dropped. And I think it would drop it like it would generate, but you'd maybe get like one every like several hours. And so it was a constant grind on the same content, which to me that started taking away from the immersiveness. But the idea was, when you went to the cities, each of the cities felt a little different, not great, but a little different than each other. I think WoW really took it to the next level with that, but it was like immersing you into this circumstance. But you not only had the faction between the environmental groups of NPCs, but also the human groups. So I just thought it was a fun immersive game world, and that part of it worked well for me. I remember making money. I just sit around and cast spells on people just to get money so I could afford other stuff in the game.
There was some article I was reading recently that was like people talking about what they learned from video games, and there was some game like this real early on. I don't think it was EverQuest, but it was something like that, where there's all kinds of in-game built economy and plenty of different interactions between characters. And you could pretty much do anything in the game. Like you could be a combat style character, you could be a merchant style character. And what he was doing everything by the book. He was a moral person. So he was playing the game the way he would live in this world.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was so hard to get anywhere and make any ground. So he's like, how do I get ahead? It's so hard. And then one of his friends is like,
forced into a life of crime.
That's exactly right. One of his friends is like, do you realize that, the best way to make money in the game is to sell empty spell books? He's like, you can sell empty spell books because you sell the spell book to a fellow player, but they can't look at it. They don't know what's in the spell book until it's in their own inventory. So you sell them an empty one for even whatever. And I guess not knowing the game, I guess you could generate spell books for free or whatever. So you would just keep selling empty spell books until you had X amount of money. Then what he did is basically built a criminal empire within the context of the game. Everything he did was to lie, steal, cheat, kill other players. And he's like, it really gave me an idea of what it's like to be in a low income world where
you're just trying to survive. That's right.
Well, where you're just trying to survive and the deck is stacked against you, and why people get into a life of crime, because it's the only way to get ahead.
Mm-hmm.
And so he got to the point where he had legitimate businesses where he was trying to go straight. And inevitably what would happen is people would just try to rip him off.
They just bring him back in.
And it made it very hard for him to maintain straight businesses in that game world, because it was very hard because of the systems at play.
Yeah. That's one of the interesting things, I think, you do learn from playing video games is, it's like, the mechanics you tweak to get by in that world.
For me, I think the things that I like playing with and learning the most about playing video games is threat management and resource management. Mm-hmm. These two things are both, and also, using those as a prime example, time management. So, like, you can absolutely understand if you are like, I'm an electrician, so it is very common where I'm on a longer job, and by longer I mean like a week or two. You're not going to have everything that you need to complete that job on day one. Sometimes, but usually not. Usually there's going to be multiple deliveries for different pieces of material. You're going to need a bunch of different things. I'll give you an example. I'm working on a job right now. So we're going to replace more than, 100, I think it's like more than 200, less than 300 lights in a building. The old lights are 2x4s. The new lights are 2x2s. So that means that we need to change the ceiling tiles. So I remove the old light. I put the new light in. Now there's a big hole in the ceiling because the new light is smaller than the old light. Well, that means we need to order ceiling tiles. If you order ceiling tiles, since we're going from a 2x4 foot hole to a 2-foot hole, we also need to order a ceiling tile grid T. It's a little metal strip that goes up there and helps hold it up. Exactly, helps hold the light up, and it also strengthens the grid. So first 3-4 days of this job, I have most of the lights, not all of them. I have no T's and no tiles. So I have to manage what can be done and what can't be done.
Because was this like a building in use too, where you couldn't just?
That's exactly right. I was just about to get to that also, because it's like, okay, great. So I can replace a ton of the lights. Like, I think I have 212 lights on the site right now, but no emergency lights. So that means I can go down a hallway and replace, 20 of the 30 lights in there, but 10 of them are emergency lights, and the emergency lights haven't arrived yet. Now, you want to try to manage it so that you just complete an area and then return to that, and then not have to return to that area, especially if you have to move office furniture and disrupt people working. Like, all of these things have to be considered. So you have to manage the time, the work, the actual work that you can do, the material, and the material you have, and decide on work based on the material that you don't. There's a lot of balls in the air. And also, I have someone that works under me that I have to supervise, and because he doesn't know nearly as much as I do, he's apprenticing. So I have to make sure that I give him tasks that he's experienced enough to complete without my direct supervision. So there's a whole lot of things, and a lot of playing video games, like like a Farmville or any sort of simulator where you're like, okay, I can build this, but I can't build this until I build this. I need roads, but the roads, I have to clear forest before I can build the road. So there's all this.
Like the first three Warcrafts were the
first three Warcrafts are perfect examples. There's a whole lot of understanding the most advantageous order of operations to your tasks. So
the next game I wanted to go into was Baldur's Gate. This game is ancient at this point. And it's not just because it's Dungeons and Dragons. There are older Dungeons and Dragons games than Baldur's Gate.
Bard's Tale.
Bard's Tale was what I thought of bringing.
I'm not sure which one's older though. I'd have to look at
Bard's Tale is older than Baldur's Gate.
Is it?
Oh yeah. Bard's Tale was one of the original RPGs. It was sort of like before someone could get the Dungeons and Dragons license games. But Baldur's Gate, the interesting thing they did there was that's the first game I really saw where it felt like there was a spell system. And the other thing too was it was a world I kind of knew. I was never a huge Forgotten Realms fan, but I knew a bit about it.
And Forgotten Realms is built off of D&D, right?
Forgotten Realms is built off of D&D. It's probably one of the bigger worlds D&D's released or content-wise. A lot of the D&D books are based in Forgotten Realms. And but the thing was, really though, it was the first time where it was a world I was kind of immersed of. So sort of like in the same sense of LOTR, there were locations I wanted to go to because I knew of them. There were characters I wanted to meet because I knew of them.
I love that.
That's where
that's exciting. When you know a character from a fiction and you get to experience it in a different fiction, especially interactive fiction.
And it's like one of the things I get more out of this from an interactive fiction, or when it's unexpected in a fiction. And the one I remember the most, which is the big reason why this game specifically of all the old Dungeons and Dragons games, was there was, I think it was a random event. Event encounter, as Dungeons and Dragons would have called it. There's a very famous dark elf in the game called Drizzt, and Ari Salvador, the character everyone knows from him. And there's like a scene where it's like you just kind of bump into like this dark elf character just blowing away mobs, monsters as they would be called in the real world. But and you're like, what the? And you realize, oh my God, that's Drizzt. And he had nothing to do with the story. But, it was like the ability where the world was larger than the story. And so you could actually have cameos of fictional things within there. And it was really meaningful. Besides like the classic Dungeons and Dragons type of monsters, like if you're playing Dungeons and Dragons game and you run into a beholder, you're like, oh my God. But that's, as far as I know, that's only a D&D thing. So, or a mind flare, unless you're, on Stranger Things too. But that was one. And the last one I wanted to talk about was, and this is a really old school game. Not really. I've played games much older than this, I guess, but it's the first one that really came to mind. And it's not a fantasy game. It's called Privateer, which, if anyone knows what the term a privateer is, typically, in the real world, it would be someone who, a shady sailor, maybe a pirate, sometimes maybe a smuggler. Oftentimes, if you have the term privateer in the real world, you were actually usually silently endorsed by someone. There was a very common term where you'd be a privateer if you were an English pirate, but the French, the Spanish, and everyone else would just call you a pirate. So it was sort of like the nicer term of someone who did bad stuff, but this was actually a space game.
I'm a privateer. Oh, pirate. Privateer.
Yeah. And I don't know if you're familiar, because this was the more popular thing, Wing Commander.
I remember Wing Commander.
Yeah, because it kind of blew up because it was the first pretty cool space like dogfighting game that I knew of. And it was like really huge for a while. Like Mark Hamill was in like one of the wing commanders, and I remember owning that. I think it was the CD one. I think that was Wing Commander 3. But the thing was, this was like a spin-off in the universe, but it was, to me, it's like Serenity in that universe. So you like inherit like the spaceship from like your grandfather or uncle or something like that, and literally it's like, okay, you get dumped into this game. You have a spaceship. What are you going to do? There's a couple guilds, like a merchants guild and like a mercenaries guild. You can get jobs from a computer. You can just take off into space and do whatever you want to. It's kind of in a way is like the first open world game, but it was in space. So I guess an open universe game that I remember playing. And you were limited in factions. Like if you couldn't afford something to do space jumps, you were stuck in the solar system until you had enough money to upgrade your ship to be able to go out into space. But kind of get into some of those things that Michael was talking about with like the resource management kind of stuff in the games. But it was also like taking and making it the spaceship that you wanted from the few different models that they had, and keeping her flying, whether it's just doing delivery hauls back and forth to a planet, or maybe going out and pirating ships, or whatever you wanted to do. And I kind of always liked games where I had that kind of freedom, which is like there are even games that I really like Red Dead Redemption 2 today. I think it's a really good game, but the problem is I don't like is I have to do certain things and unlock them before I can do them. Like if I want to play poker, I have to go to the quest to unlock poker, and then I can play poker. Where I just kind of like a world where I can just walk around, do what I want to, and experience the game, make my own story. Which is definitely not a game for everyone, but I think in a way too, that's like foundationally of probably all these other games is, Baldur's Gate. Yeah, I'm following the storyline, but it's my group. I'm creating a story for them within the bigger context of the story. Multiplayer games. You're following maybe the storylines of their quests, but ultimately you're building the story of your character within that. Which is one of the things I thought was brilliant with the LOTR quest, was because you have this well-known narrative that they wrap the story around the Lord of the Rings trilogy, which made sense because I think that was around the time the movies were coming out. The thing that made it work was your character was like a one-off character from that story at all times. So you would weave in and out of the story of the characters from the Lord of the Rings, so you felt like you were part of this bigger narrative, and it helped bring you more into the larger story. And so which I think comes down to our reoccurring thing of the story is always the most important thing. And even in a game like Civilization, you're creating the story of this made-up country in a made-up world, even though it's named after a country that you've heard of on Earth. It's really a new made-up country that you're running and creating the story for, So no matter what you're doing, always look to, if someone's interacting with it, what stories are they going to make from it? Because no matter how good your story is, interactive movies aren't the games people remember. It's when they can make their own moments within the context of the fiction that you make. That's what makes it live on. And even in books, it's my visualization of the characters. It's my emotional response to events that happen to them, which make the thing that make them stick to me. So that's really all I have, and I can feel my voice is actually starting to go again.
I actually can hear it.
So do you got anything else for anyone here?
I mean, we could go on and on about this.
Oh, yeah.
What's funny is when we started the episode, I was actually thinking about Advance Wars, and there's a new game out I think it's called War Groove, and it's on consoles, but you can make your own levels in it, and people are making all of the levels from Advance Wars, completely different game, but it plays so similarly that people are like,
it was like a perfect match.
Right. So Advance Wars is a very, very loved little strategy game that I happened to discover on one of the Game Boys. I have Advance Wars and Advance Wars 2 for, I think it's the Game Boy Advance, and that would make sense. It's called Advance Wars. But they released like a 3 and 4 on like different Game Boys that I don't own. So I never played the numbers 3 and 4. What I loved about Advance Wars is it was the perfect portable video game. For me, a portable video game and a portable video game system, one should actually be portable. So for me, that means it's got to fit in my pocket.
Mm-hmm.
PSP, the flip open Nintendo, the Switch. These are all great systems. I'm not knocking, but I don't consider them portable.
Too big. Yeah,
it's too big. I think it's great. It's a small video game system that you can pull out of your bag, and it's
maybe mobile, but not portable.
Fine to travel with, sure. But if I want portable, it needs to be smaller than my cell phone. Mm-hmm. So I have a what's called the Game Boy Micro. It was a limited release version of the Game Boy Advance. It's very small. It's smaller than my phone. It's got a real nice little screen on it, and I can play all those old Advance games, and I think even original Game Boy games will play on it, I think. And I discovered Advance Wars, and it's this great turn-based strategy game that kind of has like not quite rock paper scissors mechanics, but really close.
Mm-hmm.
Where this unit is better against this unit is better against this unit, but weak against this unit. And you can literally turn it on, play a single turn, or maybe just make a few moves, and then be like, oh, okay, the line in the bank is moving, so I need to put this away. Save it, put it back in your pocket, and you've made a little progress, and then you can pull it out and play it again later. Or you can just sit there and play for an hour if you want. For me, it was one of the most perfect portable video games ever made. So it's such a great example of understanding the platform. So just like one of our all-time most important world-building lessons is understanding your audience, understanding your avatar. If you're going to deliver a video game, or if you're going to deliver a story, you need to know, will this suit the way in which I'm going to deliver it, or would it be better delivered a different way? Like I want to make something super interactive. Sure, there's choose your own adventure books out there, but generally speaking, they're still not the most interactive. If I've got a really cool idea for an interactive story, it might be better suited in a video game format, or some sort of what do they call them? There's a term for it. It's like a playable story or something. They're not quite video games, but
like choose your own adventure.
Yeah, but it's not like a combat video game style thing. But my point is just understanding your delivery system and how appropriate what you want to share is for that delivery system, and obviously knowing your audience.
And it's true. And it's the thing, I think on top of that is the stories. You can make stories that can only exist within certain medium, so the better you understand the medium you choose to deliver your world in, you can actually custom stories. It's like you could make a video game, like a VR game, and make the inside of your spaceship completely immersive. And now you could do that in a flat screen video game by turning the controls and looking at it, but it would be a lot more immersive if you were within a spaceship inside of a VR unit. But if you're doing something on the phone with that, it's going to be much less immersive. Describing it within a book is going to be immersive based on the imagination of the reader. So it's like, understand your medium, understand how it interacts with the audience and who's going to find it there, and take advantage of it, because, there are things that you can do in books that you can't do in movies. The things you can do in movies that you can't do in books or in video games or whatever. If you choose to tell a story, deliver your world with pixel sticks, figure out the best way to take advantage of the pixel sticks before you use them.
So I guess the the real world task of these days is go out there and play some video games.
Yeah. And keep your eye out for, there's one I'm looking forward to called Ancient Cities. And I get asked a lot of times questions about, how do civilizations and stuff work in early days? Because it's something that interests me. People hear me talk about it. So I get asked questions sometimes. And this game is kind of interesting. It's like a survival city builder.
No, interesting.
Where you start off with a nomadic tribe in the Stone Age. And I think it's supposed to work through the Bronze Age, and you're trying to create this thing that survives. And so it's an indie game. So who knows if it delivers on what it says it will, it'll be a very cool game. So it's one I'm keeping my eye out on. So.
I would also encourage you guys to go out there and play some board games. My wife and I have been very excited. I don't know if it's still on sale, but I just bought Betrayal at House on the Hill, which is a classic, newer style board game, and it was on sale for like 50% off on Amazon. So it's normally like a $50-some-odd game, and it was $27.
Yeah.
So go.
It's probably one of the most
Amazon and check
fun
that out.
cooperative games I've ever played.
And if you're going to go to Amazon, go through our portal and help the show out. So go to www.garduel.com/Amazon. We also got a game called Voodoo Mania, which is a cute, fun, quickie little card game. And I finally got myself a copy of Carcassonne.
Very good. All right. And remember, Michael is the king of quickies. We'll see you next time. All right. Thank you so much for listening to the World Builders Anvil.
We would love it if you would share the World Builders Anvil with 2 of your friends.
And so would they.
If they are unfamiliar with podcasts, then you get to introduce them to the wonderful world of podcasting.
Take them to Stitcher or iTunes, or best of all, just send them to our website, www.garduel.com.
That's GARDUL.com.
Now strike while the mithril's hot.